recording, Kieran. There we go. Thank you. You'll see on the right-hand side, these are the topics that we're going to be talking about this evening. So these are working groups, volunteer working groups who are coming back and providing you with updates. We're going to hear first from seniors. That'll be Peter and Anne speaking about the spaces, supports, and services for seniors in Oakwood Vaughan. Then we're going to hear from children and their families, and then affordable housing, and then economic vibrancy and cultural retention and growth. So I will be speaking to that as well as Davin, a little bit different than a working group format. You'll hear more about that. And then Kieran's actually been working on bringing together information from across the working groups, and that's going to be shown in some map formats. And so we'll be finishing off our session with a review of some of the mapping work done to date. Now, the December 12th session has some different topics. So if you're participating with us on December 8th and you want to come back on the 12th, you will hear different things. We're going to hear on the 12th from the mobility working group. So moving in and around Oakwood and Vaughan. We're going to hear from the environment and green spaces working group. We're going to hear from the group that's focused on youth, spaces, supports, and services for youth in Oakwood Vaughan. And we're also going to hear from the enhanced health and safety group. We'll be going over economic vibrancy and retention in that one, as well as mapping. So you hear a little bit of the same topics. Our objective really with this session is to engage you and share information with you. So we would like to hear your thoughts, your opinions. And in addition, if you know of someone who has access to a computer and they were not able to attend this evening's session, please ask them to visit the OVCO webpage. We're hoping to have this session recording up and available on OVCO's webpage. If they don't have access to a computer, please do email OVCO or ovcommunityplan@gmail.com and let us know what's the best way to reach the person. And we will try to arrange for written materials to be shared with them, and or we could meet in person with some safe distancing to ensure that they are able to participate as well. We've also thought about finding an area where we might be able to bring our own laptop and share it with them. So again, please do let us know. Okay, so let's get moving. When we talk about Oakwood and Vaughan, there are a number of different things to think about. So you're going to see two slides here. Some interesting photos. I'm wondering if some of you might recognize any of the pictures here. This is one, and we're going to go to the second one. I also wonder if some of you might know where you could find these in Oakwood Vaughan. And with that, Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about OV Future Search.
Sorry, thought I was unmuted. Okay, well, Peter Clutterbuck here. I'm a resident at the kind of the lower end, actually just outside of what we've defined as the boundaries of Oakwood Vaughan, but I'm very involved in this community and very encouraged by the experience of working with people in this community. And our future search really has been sponsored by the OVCO organization, Oakwood Vaughan Community Organization. 3 or 4 years old, but the basic leadership started it about 6 or 7 years ago altogether, and have worked progressively in a bunch of issues in our community. And this plan is about describing the future of Oakwood Vaughan that we would like to see over the next 10 years. And actually, we're talking about the futures because there can be many futures in the different areas that we're addressing. We don't want to propose that there's only one future, but we have to listen carefully of what people think the futures might be in a whole variety of areas. So we must think about what our community is like now, what has changed over 20 years, what we'd like to see in the coming years. The next slide. So we actually started the OV Future Search in terms of our research earlier in the year. We engaged the Ryerson Planning School, which some of the students here tonight from Ryerson have continued as volunteers with us. And we had input from the Waterloo School of Architecture, which Cheryl Case here was involved in getting a whole bunch of students also thinking about housing opportunities in our communities. We had some good basic research done statistically with the information that was available to provide some really good solid background to what our community is like now, using mostly Statistics Canada type of data. And then a planning group was formed early on in April, made up of community members, and 7 community volunteer groups have been meeting since a launch we had on September 27th, the kickoff launch. The planning group planned for that launch, a lot of intensive planning around how so many of you were out at it, I hope, outside the VRA building on Vaughan Road. And we identified those topics to the right of that slide to ask people for their initial input on issues like enhanced health and safety, economic vibrancy, affordable housing, the others in that list. That was our particular interest in actually kind of bringing people together to get some preliminary thinking. And actually we presented some of the data we had from the previous research. So we also got a grant from the Maitrey Foundation of $21,000 in order to allow us to proceed in a more coordinated way with Kieran's help in starting to put all this together. There have been working groups working on these topics since September 27th, and that's really what we're actually bringing forward tonight, the work of these working groups. I think we can go to the next slide, right?
Yeah, we absolutely can. Thanks, Peter. So question for participants, and you don't need to go out to Slido to do this one. Please put your response in the chat. And team members, just a reminder, I'm not able to see the chat, so I'll need your help to know how that is going. So what is OV Future Search? You just heard a little summary from Peter, and there are some potential responses that are here on the slide. So please review, take a couple moments, and just for fun, there's another mural here. We've got a mural about togetherness in Oakwood and Vaughan. I'm wondering where you have seen it. Give folks a moment to put their responses in the chat. While you're doing that, I wanted to talk a little bit about why. This is about what is OV Future Search, but why? And Peter's going to continue that in a moment, but 4 things, 4 reasons of why we're doing OV Future Search. The first one, to actually bring the community together and recognize what we have. Instead of getting together because there's been some sort of a negative event happen, we decided to change it around to say, hey, let's actually come together and celebrate that we've got a lot of really great things happening here in Oakwood and Vaughan. And so bringing the community together was the #1 reason. The second reason is we know that development is inevitable, and redevelopment, especially when you look at what's going on along Eglinton with the LRT. And we would like to be a community that is welcoming of development and redevelopment, because we will have thought out a plan. We will have an idea or several ideas about what the future could be like in Oakwood and Vaughan. And so we want to be proactive in working with developers and with the city in figuring out how does that plan get implemented as part of development activity here. The third reason was actually coming from the city's planning department back in 2015. They made a commitment to Oakwood Vaughan that a charrette would be conducted. And a charrette is basically a series of discussions about the future and thinking about the future of something so you can put together a plan. And so through the years, as time went by, we decided, you know what, we should just get going with this. A community that is working together to create a community plan. And we're hoping to be able to work with the planning department once all the information is coming together. I understand we might have some planning reps joining us this evening. Welcome. The fourth reason is we are growing concerned about the affordability of being able to live in Oakwood and Vaughan. And so we actually had one of our working groups, the Affordable Housing Working Group. It even started back in June. And concern about many of us have lived here for a very, very long time and wondering how our family members going to be living here. Is that even possible now? And so there's definitely an aspect about how do we keep Oakwood and Vaughan affordable and have affordable options for those that live here. So let's actually go to the responses and see how we did. There are the answers. So all of A through D, that's what is OV Future Search. And Did anybody have the location of the mural? My team members, I can't see the chat. So if you could just speak up and let me know. Were folks able to figure out what that mural was?
No one messaged about the mural, but people got the question about OV Future Search right. A lot of people said all do above, but we listed the different answers. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kieran. Okay, so a little bit more on the why, Peter.
Okay. Well, the next slide shows you the list of topics again that we had working groups working on. Now, we wanted to know what matters most to us who live and work here in those 9 areas altogether. And the idea was that we had basic background research of the statistical base of our community, which with the help of our students and the planning group, we formed into backgrounders in each of those topics. So there are 2-page backgrounders in each of those topics that really give the quantitative or statistical picture of our community and points out some of its strengths and some of the maybe areas of vulnerability. We needed to go beyond that to get the points of view and the feelings and the understandings of people who live and work in the community. And so on September 27th, we brought that information forward to the kickoff event. We engaged some people, some of whom stayed on in working groups. And each of these working groups then designed a way in which to kind of reach out to get input from community members on those areas and to learn from the research we've done, but also offer insights to us on things that can't be really captured statistically. Things like what kind of services do we need in this community? What do we want to retain? What do we really value about these communities? How do we use some of the resources available to us to develop our community in terms of physical infrastructure, like development charges for new developments? And what we have here is the boundaries, like Sue said, that we defined. Now, these aren't firm and fixed boundaries. We're not a sovereign nation or anything, but we thought when we looked at the statistics available to us in Statistics Canada, and we wanted to get down to the neighborhood level, this is the kind of the picture that gave us neighborhood level data on things like where seniors live, where young people live, where low income areas are in our community. So we chose these boundaries as being kind of a good outline of what OV is about. People have different ways of thinking about what the boundaries of OV are, and I'm sure you will as well. I'm going to give you a poll on that in a second. But generally, I kind of think of it as from 5 Points area, Oakwood and Vaughan Road, if you kind of walk 1 kilometer in any direction, you kind of get a pretty good appreciation of the central part of what we call the OV. But some of you may well have different notions of what should be included in that. And so I think that Kieran is going to give you a chance to say what you should, whether you think there should be some different views on the boundaries.
The poll is just put in for everyone to see.
Perfect.
The chat, if you go into the chat, you'll find a link and you get a chance to give some of your views on proper boundaries. What's the Oakwood Vaughan community?
Thanks so much, Peter and Kieran. I'm going to leave this slide up so everybody can see the map. And if you want to be going back and forth between the map and the poll, and we'll give that a minute or two.
And let me know if you have any difficulty getting onto the poll and all.
Thanks, Kieran. How are we doing in terms of numbers in the poll, Kieran?
It's looking pretty good. I can't see precise numbers of who's answered, but it's been changing a lot. Looks like we have a lot of responses.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody.
14 people so far.
And we have 22?
23.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'll make my way over to the poll so that we can look at the results. One moment, please. Okay. Looks like we've got 16 respondents.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to share again and just see how this worked out. Okay, wow. It looks like we've got about half have said that they are okay as is with the map as shown. We have a couple of folks that have said here, actually a quarter have said, so we've got extend further south, we've got extend further north, and an other. So we'll need to look at our Q&A a little bit later. Thank you so much, everybody, for filling that in. Kieran, can we just leave that poll open, and if folks wanted to, they could still add or edit through this presentation.
Mhm.
Thanks so much. Okay, and with that, we finished our introduction. We're actually going to move now to spaces, supports, and services for seniors. And I'm going to welcome Peter as well as Anne to take us through that.
Okay. You give us the full screen. Oh, that's the full screen version. Okay, great. I'm Peter Clutterbuck again, and joined by Anne in making this presentation with the co-leaders of the working group, who are identified there. Barbara Geiger and Janet Patterson are on the line with us. Alex Mayer was with us for the first part, but he had other commitments and had to leave. But we all came together on September 27th at the kickoff and decided this was our area of interest. We're all seniors, and we have good networks to reach out to. So we formed a seniors group. And we started to figure out what is our thinking about aging in Oakwood and then in the community. And the next slide kind of shows something that we found from the city of Waterloo that I can't change these slides, right? You change these slides, right? Yeah, the city of Waterloo gave us a bit of a conceptual framework. I'm not going to go through this in detail. This will be on the website if you wish. Basically, about 70,000 seniors age in care and long-term care homes in this province. And about 700,000 get home care support in this province, although the budget that goes to each is far outweighing in favor of aging in care. We think it's important to age in place, to have home care, to be able to stay in your community. We thought what really captured us was this notion of aging in community, not only getting the support you need in your home, but also getting the support to remain engaged in your community. So what really attracted us to this way of thinking is a notion of what can we do to help people age in our community and stay in our community and be properly safe and secure in their own homes. So this was our framework. If you go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the process that we followed. And the next slide shows our how we organized ourselves and the activities that we did. We've had 3 meetings so far. The first kind of set up, what do we understand about our community? How do we read the data that we had from our maps, produced out of the research that was done? Where do we think we have to go to find out information, and what kind of strategy we're going to have for collecting data? Our second meeting brought back this data to the table to start to study it together. And actually, that's where we started to review models of home and community support that helps seniors live well in the community, stay in the community, and thrive in the community. We also identified some additional outreach that we needed to do. In our third meeting, we discussed the work that we had done up to then and how we'll present tonight. What we need to do, continue to get deeper. We don't feel we have a good enough reflection of the full nature of the community, although we got a really good start, as Anne will explain. And we sketched out a tentative outline for our final report. The way that we, next slide shows the way that we actually went about collecting our data. And this essentially was the mapping that I talked to you earlier about. Senior population in OV neighborhoods, we can show the distribution across the neighborhoods. And we have higher than normal numbers in people living alone. 38% OV seniors live alone compared to 25% in the city. Higher than a proportionate numbers of seniors over 80 years old. about a third of our seniors, and a slightly higher proportion of people living on low income. Those are all three risk factors for ending up in a nursing home rather than being able to stay in your own community. We're thankful to Oscar Redemo, who helped us do the maps that showed where these distributions are. I think Oscar might be on the line here. We then did a senior survey that we sent out to a number of different channels, and we got 17 respondents so far, but it's still out there. We want to get more information on what the seniors like about living in OV, what improvements are needed, and how do they prefer? Do they want to remain in OV or not as they continue to age? And finally, we did interviews with local service providers, Reconnect Community Health Services so far, Garrison Creek Family Health Team lined up next week, and Unison is trying to find a time when we can talk. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne to talk about really what we learned, data collection, what are some of the ways you reached out, and what our top three findings were.
So what we did is we reached out to different places of worship. We know that seniors proportionally have a high percentage of affiliation with different worship places. We haven't had much of a response, but we are continuing to do that. And then we did door-to-door interviews with senior tenants in one of the local high rises. What we found was that tenants are long-standing in the community, 30 to 40 years as a tenant. They've raised their families in here and now they're aging in place. People feel safe in Oakwood Vaughan. Affordability was flagged as a concern. People feel trapped. They may not, they can't afford to move, but they can't afford to live even though their rents may be lower because they've lived there a long time. And people rely primarily on informal supports, family members and neighbors to help them when the weather is bad or if they aren't feeling well. Next slide. So what we found is that people really have from both the surveys and the interviews, people have a strong community attachment. People value living here. They wish to remain here. And rather than relocating for the most part, there's some who say, some homeowners who might say, I'll move near my kids. But for tenants and for many people, they would like to stay in the neighborhood. There was a really strong preference for a senior center close by for community activities, services, and supports. People were very excited about the idea that maybe something like Vaughan Road Collegiate could become a senior center because there's really nothing that close. And Peter, the last
And
one.
one of our other things in doing other research, we found that there were many proven senior support models, both residential and in-home type support models that help seniors stay in the community, which became one of our objectives. How do we create a community not only good for this for seniors now in terms of how they experience the community, but how they can plan to stay in the community and properly supported and be part of community life rather than just kind of living only at home. And so we studied different models like naturally occurring retirement communities, the hub and spoke model, pocket neighborhoods, village models. There's all different types of models that are proven in around the world, in North America and around the world, that help people stay in the home. So a place like Denmark, for example, hasn't built long-term care beds since the 1980s because it supports people as much as possible in the community. So that was our commitment. And so when you look at these top three findings, we're just interested in what you might be most interested in learning more about. So our poll question is, which of the above findings would you like to know more about? And I'll turn it to Kieran to put that up, I guess, in the chat.
It is up.
Okay. Good, thank you, Kieran.
Where's the link? In that poll.
So I think the next slide has the poll questions in case people want to see them on here and also.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I can see it.
Are you-
You get to that through the link in the chat box, and then you can answer what you,
You do it. I can't do it.
and Karen will post the results. We'll see what people think they might want to know more about. And I'll just tell you right now, certainly you get in touch with me. There's an email at the end of this slide that shows you how to get in touch with me if you're interested in in finding out more about this or joining us in our thinking. Karen, you're going to show us the results?
I'm going to, one moment.
Sorry, didn't know it was
Yeah.
you.
Problem. Okay, it looks like we have 11 respondents. I'll share the screen. There we go. Oh, 13. Fantastic. Peter, you want to speak to the results there?
They want us mostly interested, I think, in how people highly valued and wish to stay in Oakwood Vaughan. Is that what I read here?
The proven support modules for how to age in the community to
Oh.
be created. Yep. So it's for
Okay, oh, that's great.
69%, which is super.
That's great. Well, that's definitely our interest is not only learning more about those models, but thinking about what's really appropriate for Oakwood Vaughan. Not all of these models are necessarily appropriate for our community. So if you're really interested in that, get in touch with me and we'll continue the conversation with you on that. And perhaps you even want to join our group in some of our thinking. Maybe not as a permanent member, but when we have conversations together, you might want to think through us and we can bring the information forward to you to study.
Okay.
So in terms of moving forward, we are not satisfied with the input we've had from certain communities, from more marginalized, racialized communities. We have a strategy for getting into the northwest corner of our boundaried area here, where we know there are people living there who could give us good insights into what seniors living is like in this community when you don't have a lot of means. So we're going to continue that. We're continuing to collect surveys. We're getting great assistance from Reconnect Community Health Services around trying to get these surveys out. And we're going to get that information over the month of December. And again, we're going to look to these support models and try to get a webinar actually with one that was tried nearby here in Peel Senior Link on the hub and spoke model. And actually, if some of you are interested in that, send me your name. And when we line that little session up, we'll make sure you're invited to it. We're also now exploring maybe getting some funding that might help us to get deeper into our community among those people who don't often get a chance to participate, maybe because they don't have computers, maybe because they don't get our messages. And we want to be more aggressive around inviting people into this discussion. So we're looking at some funding might help us do that, even beyond our current planning period.
So Peter, that's time.
Yeah.
If we could get at least 1 to 2 minutes in for questions. Are there
Yep.
questions that have been coming in? Team members that have been monitoring the chat. And if you'd like to come off mute and ask a question through audio, feel free to do that now.
Also, if you want to fill out the survey, I've put the link to that in the chat and the email for OV Community Plan if you would like to reach out to Peter to get further involved with this work.
Okay.
We have a question in the chat. What methods have been used to try to engage with racialized seniors in the North End?
In the North End? Well, as in the North End. Just a second.
Timer's going off, yes.
I'm turning this off.
So one of the things, like we've identified sort of in the area right around Vaughan Road, some of the high rises, and we're trying to go door to door with people who live in the building, who identify people they know, who sort of using the snowball technique. And in the north end, I think with Reconnect, we're hoping to around Dufferin and Eglinton. I think, Peter, you can speak to that.
Yes, Reconnect, great fellow Marvin Weeks there, whom we met, is going to get our surveys distributed in a couple of Toronto housing community buildings there. And I perhaps get some people together. It's difficult to meet in groups. People who can't get on Zoom, for example, we're hoping to get a chance to talk to people as well as get survey information from them. So that's our first 2 initiatives.
Yeah, and if you have any other suggestions,
Yes.
please send them to us, because we really want to make sure we hear from all different voices in the community.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Peter and Anne, and thank you for the question that's coming forward. I can see that there's a question coming in there that's not related to this particular topic. So I'm just going to ask some of my the team members to please deal with that question while I take us to children and their families. So Zach, I believe you're going to be presenting this one, perhaps along with Peter. I'm going to move us into slideshow mode.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, I'll be taking care of this one. So I'm
Great.
Zachariah, or Zach. I've been working with Peter on the children and family group. So children we're defining as ages 0 to 14, along with their families. So I'm a Ryerson planning student. I came in through a school project to work with these guys, and I've stuck around with them. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get a sense of our first approach. So we started doing background research to get a sense of the community, of the kind of the demographics of what the major issues are and the major questions are for the neighborhood. So we found 3 main findings. The first one is that there's a high number of young children in OV, that's ages 0 to 4. So of 1,865 total children, about 39% are young children. The second finding was that there's limited local childcare availability. So we have 9 local childcare programs in Oakwood Vaughan, but that's only capacity for about 300 young children. And only 3 of those childcare programs are subsidized, which works out to about 200 spots. So of 720 young children, we have 200 subsidized spots within those boundaries. And then our third finding was that kind of on average across the Oakwood Vaughan boundaries, there's an average after-tax income that's lower than the Toronto average. And then a fair percentage of Oakwood Vaughan families are lone parent households. I think the city average of lone parent households is 32.5 and Oakwood Vaughan is 39. So those are the kind of the initial demographics that we looked at. As we move to the next slide. This is just an example of some of the visuals that we've been working on. This is the number of low children in low income. The darker red areas are where the higher concentration of low income children live. And that's about 500 children across Oakwood Vaughan, which is about 20% of the children. If we move to the next slide, there's also some other concerns for older school-age children who may be out of daycare and may have been impacted negatively by COVID isolation. So a TDSB survey from 2021 found that a lot of students, 40 and 50%, feel lonely or nervous or worried all the time or often. And then a very fair number of parents and their children feel that they will fall behind in their schoolwork due to COVID. So despite these concerns, these academic concerns and these socializing concerns, there's an identified absence of programs and options and spaces to use in OV. So if we move to the next slides here, we're looking at our initial process here. So we began trying to contact parents in the summer to engage in discussions. Following our September launch, we reached out to other local organizations like childcare, LEF, Vaughan Road Childcare, other healthcare centers, schools, and parent councils. We found it has been a challenge to get parents together at the same time for group discussions. Busy schedules, busy school years, totally understandable. We've had one great Zoom discussion so far. So in lieu of that, we've put together a survey, which has been getting some good responses. We've had 16 responses to date. I guess that was actually as of Monday. So could be having some more now, but 8 respondents of the survey indicated they'd like to get more involved in a discussion group, which is excellent. And that survey is still open, and there'll be some links in the chat if you guys are interested. So that's where we're at so far. If we move to the next slide, oh, sorry. Yeah, this is an example of our survey questions that are on there. We split it up into present and future Oakwood Vaughan. Present, kind of getting a sense of what barriers and opportunities there are in the neighborhood, and then future OV, getting a sense of how to brainstorm for future changes. So if we move into our findings, there's actually 4 main findings from our research. The first finding is that parents are having difficulty connecting. They're having very difficult time coming together for programming and organization, essentially getting parents and children together in one place to build a network. That could be things like basketball and sports and recreation. Other parents mentioned putting together a community parent organization or other community and social events like a recipe share and things like that. The second finding was that libraries and parks are consistently cited as supportive gathering spaces. So that's where parents and their children find the most success in getting together and meeting with each other and find the safest opportunity to gather. Number 3 is that neighborhood affordability and racism were major obstacles that were mentioned by survey respondents. And this is, we might see a pattern here across all of our groups today, but other equity concerns that were mentioned were disability and accessibility, cultural and language barriers, and then gentrification and displacement when other kind of more wealthier families move in to Oakwood Barn. And then our fourth finding here was pretty wide support for a community center, similar to the senior center idea, but wide support for community center with drop-in programming. So the next slide here just has two examples that were consistently cited. The Vaughan Road Academy and the Oakwood Village Library were brought up quite often by parents as ideas to kind of repurpose existing buildings and assets, which would be really great use of current assets. So of those four findings, there's another Slido poll here, of which there should be a link in the chat there. Of these four findings, which of these findings do you consider most significant? So that was, parents having difficulty connecting, libraries and parks, neighborhood affordability and racism, or community center programming. This kind of poll and these kinds of things are a great example of the community kind of discussion and consensus that we need, because again, we have a lot of data from the surveys and we have some data from our research, but what we really need now is kind of community consensus coming together and choosing priorities for the plan.
So that is in the chat, right? The link.
Yeah.
Links in the chat there, yeah.
And while people are doing that, I just like to say that Zach and I really didn't have a working group, and Zach is obviously doing the grunt work here. He's been excellent working on his own around helping get this outreach going and analyzing the data that we have, and especially doing a really good presentation on our statistical situation here around families with children. So and Zach and Morgan and Davin, who are on the line, are Ryerson students who continued with us beyond last winter term to be volunteers. So we really owe a debt of gratitude to all three of them, and I appreciate Zach taking a lot of leadership on this presentation.
Happy to be here. So I don't know if the poll is coming up on screen there. Looks like it is. Beautiful. And so we're seeing kind of the major one there being neighborhood affordability and racism as major obstacles to parents and families. So that makes a lot of sense. And again, we're going to see patterns like that throughout most of these working groups. So the question then is how to kind of link our groups together on common plans that can come together and tackle these issues there. So yeah, great example of kind of community discussion and the discourse to bring the priorities in. If we are able to, I guess we don't really need to go back to the PowerPoint other than to say, we do need participation as well as data. So the survey is still open and the working groups we're trying to put together. So please email the OV community plan email or mention on the survey if you're interested in joining. But I think that's it for families and children.
We've got a little bit of time for questions. Zach, we've got about 3 minutes for questions. So if folks would like to come off mute and ask a question, or if there are questions that are about this topic that are in the chat, now's the time.
We have one question there from Janet.
Thanks. Well, I'm really impressed with some of these findings. I appreciate the challenge of actually getting input from either very busy or marginalized, or people who have language barriers or technology barriers, whatever. And I just wondered, in the various working groups, do you have a figure in mind of the number of responses that would give you assurance or some confidence that the findings are truly representative of the community?
I don't think necessarily. No, we haven't got the rigorous sampling and scientific approach that's going to give us true representation. What we have to get is a solid reflection of the community. We have to get some impressions from the community about what they think is important. And then we have to bring those findings to the community again to understand and to discuss them more thoroughly. So that's our plan. We do have to have clear strategies, as I think we're all trying to form, about how to get to the right places to make sure that we represent, that we not represent, but we get access to the views of people from different cultural, racial backgrounds, for example, and income levels. For example, Reconnect tells us that they serve 266 senior clients here in the Oakwood Vaughan boundaries on our streets here in Oakwood. And about 40% of those, or 37% of those are actually Hispanic people. And when I would like to find ways, and perhaps going to this Hispanic church on Oakwood Avenue to get access to maybe some of the people in that community's views on what seniors need, and maybe even families with children. So we have to be a kind of bit more in exploring, ways to get this information. We can't count on any one data source to get that kind of information. But it's a matter of outreach and effort. And any ideas you have, would be great for us.
Great question. We can do one more question if there are any others. I'm going to rely on team members to let me know if there's anything in the chat that's related to this topic.
One thing I did want to say is a lot of the data and stuff that I presented very briefly on is available in the backgrounders that we've put together as a group. So I'm just putting a link in the chat here that connects to the OVCO site, which has all of our backgrounders and all of the data and research that we've been doing so far up to now.
And I'll also send that link again, and also a link to our website at the end of the presentation so that everyone has it before we log off for the night.
Fantastic. Thanks, team. All right, we are moving along. We're going to hear from the Affordable Housing Working Group, and I believe that's Cheryl and Bill. So Cheryl and Bill, take it away.
Thanks, Sue. I'll be leading this presentation. The affordable housing work is done by Bill and myself. Bill, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello.
Oh yeah, hello. Yeah. We work on the overall affordable housing strategy. I'm more involved in the policy component, and he's more involved in the tenant organizing component. But we did work on this presentation together. So first, a little bit of fun here. We have in supporting affordable housing, I think it's important also to recognize that there is some really interesting and affordable housing in the neighborhood. You'll see that photo right there is a building in the neighborhood. Anyone have a guess of what building that is? Yep, Shamala got it. Oh, Winona and Eglinton. Yep, that's the Winona Co-op. So that's one example of an affordable housing model that might be something that we promote through the community work that's being done here. So the process is we're pursuing 3 outcomes. Number 1 is to increase planning activities that serve tenant needs, including the protection and increase of affordable housing supply. So that includes our development of an affordable housing working group, our engagement with the city and other stakeholders to promote their delivery of planning studies that reflect community interests around this topic of affordable housing and protecting tenants. Number 2 is to increase community knowledge of community planning and issues and processes. So for example, learning about what does inclusionary zoning mean? What is a community planning council? What is a committee of adjustment? These are all things that are really important in shaping our housing policy in the neighborhood, but aren't really easy to come across and to understand. So maybe to give you a quick rundown on some of these ideas, inclusionary zoning is a policy that says that requires a certain amount of the housing in the neighborhood to be affordable. That's newly developed housing. Committee of Adjustment and the Community Planning Council are both spaces in the city of Toronto that decide on whether or not to approve new housing. So the third outcome being pursued is commitments from all levels of government and affordable housing developers to maintain and build affordable housing. So that's the ultimate goal that we have. Affordable Housing Working Group activities. This is related to the first outcome. So far they've provided feedback on our Right to Remain survey. They've walked the entire neighborhood to identify opportunities to produce and protect affordable housing. So we actually had 8 residents walking 4 different parts of the neighborhood. And the working group members have advocated for inclusionary zoning in the neighborhood. To again repeat, what is inclusionary zoning? They've advocated for the city to require a certain percentage of new development to include a certain percentage of new development to a certain percentage of the new development to include affordable housing. And then 4, they've begun organizing to secure affordable housing at 645 Northcliffe Boulevard. So this one is very early. We're actually having our first meeting on 645 Northcliffe tomorrow. So if you're interested in joining, please send me an email. Kieran, if you can please put my contact in the chat. So one of the main outcomes that we're looking for out of the Affordable Housing Working Group is to establish this policy concept called the right to remain. So a right to remain ensures that tenants are provided with affordable housing in the neighborhood while their former home is under redevelopment. So for example, there's a major development application on 108 to 107 Eglinton, which is just at the corner of Eglinton and Dufferin. There's about a 4-story apartment. You'll see in the next slide. That's going to be turned into a 30-story apartment, or a 30-story apartment. And so what's going to happen to the tenants during the construction period of that development? We're hoping to ensure that those residents actually have affordable housing in that neighborhood that they can move into. And I think I saw Bill smiling a little bit because we actually had to Photoshop the picture because the developer doesn't actually include a full height picture of the development that they're proposing. So we had to make it ourselves. Does anyone have any questions on this right to remain policy? Feel free to leave it in the chat. I will move. Oh, I see Janet.
I was just curious. That's a really, really interesting idea. Are you aware of, like, are there proven models of right to remain policy that's actually enacted?
Kieran, can you respond? Because Kieran's done some research on this.
So Portland has, I think, was one of the first cities in North America that has this policy, and it's been well praised. It hasn't had a lot of years on the ground yet to have a bunch of data, but it is moving forward and it's looking pretty positive. And then Austin, Texas, which also has a really bad housing crisis right now, just implemented a right to remain policy as one of the methods to combat their housing crisis down there.
Yeah. Thank you, Kieran. And so I think another thing to note about that this specific policy concept that we're pursuing that's really interesting is on the first slide, you see that this affordable housing work is funded by a couple of major programs. The CMHC National Housing Strategy is one of them. So the National Housing Strategy, we have some seed funding from them to specifically develop this right to remain policy. And so if you go to the next slide, the survey is a really big part of this. So in helping us to know what type of housing should we be encouraging to be developed to home people who are displaced, and also what buildings should people be eligible to receive housing support from if they're displaced from that building. So if someone is living in an apartment that is only 2 to 5 units, are they eligible to a right to remain? Or is it only people who are being displaced from larger apartments of 50 units or more? So we want to know where should we target, and we want to hear from you because we want to have this policy reflect community interests. Thank you, Karen. Next slide.
Just to let you know, you're at 7 minutes, Cheryl.
Okay, no worries. So this is the planning backgrounder. If you go to the next slide. So here are 4 key findings. So far we've had 64 properties identified for potential affordable housing sites. There's really important that we continue to pressure the city and province to study the neighborhood for inclusionary zoning. And that there's a lot of support from multiple levels of government, nonprofit, and private sectors, but we need to be applying. So we need to establish a vision so that they know how to support us. And that affordable housing has been voiced as a concern for many parts of the community. And then next steps is fill out the right to remain survey. We'll be organizing tenants of 1801, 1807 Eglinton, ensuring 645 Northcliffe has affordable housing, ensuring inclusionary zoning, and then training session on how to secure affordable housing. And that's it. We can end it there.
Great, thanks. So we've got a couple minutes for questions. Are there questions for the Affordable Housing Working Group? Can you come off mute, please, or put your questions in the chat. I'm going to rely on my team's eyes to help me with that.
Janet has a question about Airbnb units, I think. Right?
Can you elaborate, Janet?
Yeah, it wasn't a question. It was a thought in response to your question about what might be some a source of temporary housing, because that's what we're talking about, temporary housing, right? And it, unless we're going to be proposing building structures that are kind of like hotels, there is already temporary housing in the form of Airbnb units. And one of the big criticisms of Airbnb, of course, is that it takes out units that might normally be rented out on a long-term basis. It takes those out of the market. And so this would be a way of maybe, that's kind of the price for Airbnb unit owners for the right to take out those kind of units, is that they need to make them available. I don't know. It's a thought that occurred to me.
Yeah. So like for example, 1801, 1807 Eglinton will take like at least 2 years to be developed. So that means the people who are displaced would be displaced for 2 years. And so the Airbnb unit would not be the place that they would move into during that period. They would be moving into more stable housing that, like in our strategy, we might be actually building this housing as permanent housing that can house people temporary to when they are able to return.
Fred has a question.
Yeah, Cheryl, thank you. I've sent you an email separately to connect afterwards. We are running into the same type of thing where our organization is trying to develop some affordable housing, but we have to find temporary locations for about 10 to 15 individuals who are in one of the buildings that we currently own that will be replaced by this new one. Have you looked at any, at putting an inventory together of TCHC housing currently available within Oakwood Vaughan to see how that fits into the mix and how to connect with that group to see if that might, if worked properly, that could be used as a way to provide some temporary opportunities, depending on what that is.
So Bill and I actually have a meeting with the City of Toronto next week as part of the National Housing Strategy National Health Program. And so that's definitely something that we can ask them if that is an opportunity. Because being able to house people in the neighborhood is one of the very strong interests that we have to maintain community relationships. So definitely TCHC housing could be an option. I am also aware that there is a organization out there that specializes in connecting displaced tenants with housing. And so one of our priorities is to actually connect with that organization and see how they can actually support us in the work that we're doing in the neighborhood as well.
Okay, as I said,
Thanks
I've
so
dropped you,
much,
and I've dropped
Cheryl.
you a note separately on connecting on National Housing Strategy and the work that you're doing. Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much, Cheryl, and thanks also Fred and Janet for questions. Okay, we are going to move into economic vibrancy and growth, as well as cultural retention and growth. And that's actually Davin and I. Let me just get this ready. There we go. Team, I'm hoping everything is showing up okay.
It is.
Great. Thanks so much. So again, I'm Sue, and Davin is joining me in this presentation. Hi, Davin. So once upon a time, there was a little neighborhood that could, and that's OV. We have actually combined two very important topics, partly because when we started digging into them, we realized there's a lot of connections between them. And so we came at this a different way. We don't have working groups established on each of these topics. We could still do that, but at the moment we don't have them. So if anybody's interested, do let us know. So instead, we took a very different approach. We started by doing in-person surveys. And there were 51 in-person surveys that were conducted all across OV, so that map that we put up earlier. We are so glad we went with this approach because having those in-person interactions with safe distancing, just by going into shops, by stopping people on the sidewalk. Myself, I was talking with 3 gentlemen that were sitting in front of the Canadian Caribbean restaurant right at the 5 Points next to Sam's. And, you know, it was a way of actually connecting with people in the neighborhood who maybe wouldn't normally be connecting. Maybe some people we talked with don't even have computers. Who knows? We just had a different approach that we really think worked. We're really glad we did it this way. And so we want to share with you what we heard. So let's get right into that. We've got Davin, you're going to take us through the first set of findings.
Yes. So yeah, here's a few of the facts from the surveys. So as we approached people in OV on the streets, in the laundromats, shops, libraries, we heard that 43 of 51 people lived and or worked in OV. So while 7 people were actually visiting, almost half of everyone we talked to mentioned the food in OV. They, and then, you know, as we say they, we also assume it represents you, talked about the shops where they buy food, and they stated that they want more choices in restaurant selections. Everyone is looking forward to the return to eating in restaurants. So here's a word cloud showing the names of all the places to buy food that they talked about. The larger font shows sort of the more names that were stated. In this case, it's actually Pita Ikram and Soul Provisions. So you also told us that food was a great way to learn about the cultures. Sometimes we hear languages other than our own spoken while we're trying food that is not part of our own ethnicity. So yeah, let's look at languages on the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Davin. The survey questions, there were actually 2, and they were, what are the languages that you hear spoken when you are wandering around in OV? And what are also the languages that you speak? And this is what you said, or at least the 51 people said. And we were not totally shocked by the variety because we'd already done quite a lot of work in looking at the 2016 census information. And perhaps one of my team members could put the link to the culture background or actually into the chat. So you can see that there's a lot of similarity between what we heard on the survey and what was even in that census. A few differences here. And what was also just a quick anecdote was a gentleman actually sharing and speaking some of those languages with me as we were doing the survey and being very patient as I was trying to also say that. So it was a neat way to learn and make a connection with people. So we're going to move and look at some of the other results that came in. The question that we asked in the survey was, like, what can we be doing to both recognize and to learn more about the cultures of people that live in Oakwood Vaughan? And so we had a really overwhelming response. You got that sense from what Davin just talked about with respect to food, and it tied quickly into what you see in the blue line here. Hold an OV festival and a cultural event. There were several people that actually had the request. Could we shut down the 5 Points intersection and actually hold an event like this to learn about all of our different cultures that are here and to share food? Food was a big theme, which was great. And there are a lot of other great suggestions that you can see here on the slide. Food comes in again. Unfortunately, while conducting the survey, we actually encountered a few racist remarks that were being shared by different people that we were interviewing. And there was no commonality in terms of the identified ethnicity of the people that were sharing these remarks. And sometimes it just came out of the blue. And in many cases, I'm not sure that people even recognized what they said, that be interpreted and or really was quite racist. So you heard this before in some of the other groups. They have talked about where racism is happening in the neighborhood, and it is a barrier. It's an obstacle. And so, that's something that as we move forward with the community plan, we need to do a lot of work to be learning more about each other and to find ways to increase tolerance, because we all belong here, and we should all be able to feel that way as well.
6-minute mark.
Thank you. So Davin, what's culture?
Okay, so I'm really sorry my dog is barking in the background. But yeah, so what is culture? So that was, sort of a question we, often had while we were doing the research as rising groups, and then also certainly us ourselves. But this is what we thought of. We thought of the languages, the traditions, ethnic backgrounds, food, shops, and artistic expressions in many forms. But what does it mean to you? For example, we have here the BIA poster, which picks up on the patterns of the Caribbean quilts painted on the concrete benches at the 5 Point Island. So this is an example of some artistic expression and sort of an example of the culture in OV. So the following, we have a poll it's not a poll, it's a word cloud that allows you to sort of contribute and say what culture is to you. Just get that.
And that poll or the word cloud link should be going in the chat.
Yep. The link is in the chat.
Wonderful. How are we doing on that word cloud?
We have 2 people so far. So some votes are coming in.
Gotta think about this one, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, so of course we sort of included some examples, but we want to, hear more about what it means to you in OV.
And we've got 7 folks that have completed the poll. Oh, we're up to 8.
Lots of different definitions coming in.
So again, for folks that are just heading over to that word cloud, what does culture mean to you in 3 words or less? We have 9 who've done the poll. And we're up to 11. I'm going to share. Oh, we're up to 12. I'm going to share the results now just so we can keep moving along here. There we go, 13. Thanks so much for the 13 of you that were participating. So we can see culture. What does culture mean to you? And the size of the word is what's telling us that was most prevalent. And so we have identity, we have connection, and commonalities. There are a lot of commonalities across various cultures, of course. So appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and thank you so much. We'll be wrapping that into the OV community plan. Okay, I'm going to take us back over. There we go. So very, very quickly here. One of the other results was we asked, what do you like about living and or working in Oakwood Vaughan? And you can see this is the top down one, and the overwhelming response there was really 55% of everybody who responded said they really like us. They really like the neighborhood, the feeling of community that we have here in Oakwood and Vaughan. I thought it was really neat. There's lots of other responses here. And again, this will be available for you later on. Alvin, if you could take us into economic vibrancy and growth, some of the issues.
So yeah, so while of course people sort of love the community OV, there's some challenges which sort of hinder the economic and cultural growth within the community. So in 2016, the City of Toronto actually did an economic scan of the community, and it claimed that 15% of the store fronts were actually vacant. So this sort of negatively impacts the streetscape and contributes to a general sort of feeling of disinvestment within the community.
And Davin, sorry to interrupt you, just in the interest of moving us forward. I'm going to put the rest that are up here. I think we're all aware about Eglinton and the LRT's impact. I'm going to move us to some of the solutions that we've talked about.
So yeah, we have some solutions that we've identified to sort of help deal with some of the challenges the community is faced with. So in association with the tools found in Ryerson's final report, we put together a list of tools. So firstly, a request that a % of all development charges be directed to the BIA. So the resources could go towards a new business startup found for the BIA to manage, or fund, sorry. Perhaps they could consider renting vacant storefronts for pop-up shops, like a Win This Space campaign. They could also use the funds for the implementation of the city's facade or shopfront improvement program, and also use them to create and facilitate cultural events in OV. Another solution is a buy local campaign, which would help to encourage cross-promotion among stores with a greater emphasis on the value of OV's skilled trades. So the buy local campaign would go beyond the traditional brick and mortar store concept and promotes OV's local trades. This could help to ensure they are employed by the redevelopment projects occurring within OV. So the introduction of a Indigenous cultural series could be a great cultural solution, bringing visual connections on the street and in shops and services along Vaughan Road. A series of activities could include the Moccasin Project and a story mapping walk as an extension to the BIA's Roots and Roots series from summer 2021. This would help to bring greater recognition to Vaughan Road's Indigenous heritage. Another solution we have is an urban design guideline included in the OV community plan, which would be another helpful tool to encourage walkability and the continued village feel of shops within the residential above. The guidelines would require increased heights to be stepped back from the street to ensure a more human-like feel. And our last solution is the creation of a community improvement plan that prioritizes investment within the neighborhood, which aligns with our green mobility and enhanced health and safety priorities.
Awesome, thanks, Devin. And I think there's a poll that's open.
Yeah. So we have another poll here, which asks which one of these solutions would be most important or perhaps have the most impact with OV's economic growth and culture. So it'll be in the chat there for everyone.
And just due to time, while folks are working on that, I'm going to open up for questions. Are there any questions in the chat, or folks like to come off mute and ask some questions with respect to economic vibrancy as well as cultural retention and growth? I'm going to need the eyes of my team members to help with that. There are questions there.
Devin or Sue, could you mentioned in one of the slides about skilled trades or the trades that are in the area? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so some of the survey responses, when we were talking to people, sometimes topics came up. We asked people about, do you live in OV or do you work in OV? And some of those responses were about working in OV and working in different trades like construction. There was a gentleman that I talked with who is a painter. So there was a sense that there's a wealth of trade skills here in Oakwood Vaughan, and how do we think about that beyond just thinking about there's bricks and mortar stores? They are all equally important. And so some of that was coming up through the survey topics. And I think some of that actually came up during our launch discussions as well. Does that help?
Yeah, and sort of one of the solutions solution was to introduce a buy local campaign. So yeah, traditionally that would be for brick and mortar stores, cross promotion of the different stores. But we sort of want to sort of emphasize the skilled trades within the community. So that can be done with, and with the brick and mortar stores too.
There's only 2 responses to the poll, so.
Yeah, the wrong link was put in, so we're putting in the my copy function keeps malfunctioning, I think.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll just leave that poll open, and folks can be responding to that. Because I know I wanted to give time, Kieran, for you to be able to talk just a little bit about the mapping. We're going to move to that.
Sorry if we run over time a little bit, but we should be able to just squeeze in. We might skip over the poll for the mapping though, which I think people filled out already because that was the one that I sent in. I just had it clipboard, unfortunately, already. Awesome.
Bring up your slides now.
So yeah, as the slides are brought up, my name is Kieran, and I'm the project coordinator, as mentioned before, for OV's Future Search, which has put me in the position of interacting and coordinating between the different co-leads, which has allowed me to make a series of maps and focus on the intersections between all the different working groups. So the next slide, to start with the mapping, we made individual maps, as you can see here, that were created for each working group. And these maps have all kinds of information on them. So the dots you see are not only existing services and shops, but also things that people want in the neighborhood or want improved. And they were a great way to start seeing the different crossovers between working groups. The next slide shows us a quick example of one of the maps we created for the mobility working group. And it's not complete, it's what we have so far from the data we've collected. And for example, you can see on here, the green icons show that people really want a couple of the Vaughan bus stops to be reinstated, because I think 2 bus stops were taken off of the Vaughan bus route. And that's caused a lot of problems for folks who have mobility issues, or if the weather is really bad, you want to be able to get off your bus right at where your house is. So there's also the orange ones show where we need traffic signals, signs, and traffic lights to increase safety. And you can start to see through these bins that mobility actually intersects with health and safety and other issues through accessibility and traffic safety. And we're going to go into these intersections a bit more in the next slide. So you can see that OV Future Search is built around these different topics that are in this infographic, most of which have been formed into working groups, and we've started to hear from those working groups, and we'll continue to hear from them on Sunday. These topics, however, do not exist in a silo, and there's a lot of crossover, and these intersections are very important. So we started looking at these intersections by the highlights that come up consistently in the different working groups. You can see these highlights listed here as community spaces, parks, community centers, schools, current affordable housing, and Vaughan Road Academy. So as an example of the intersections, the parts that the community does have are highly used and appreciated. They were mentioned by the environmental working group, the children's working group, the mobility working group, just to name a few. Affordable housing was also a key thing that people need. We heard from the seniors. We also heard directly from the affordable housing working group. And it has become harder and harder to find. But this map shows a few of the key points, examples of affordable housing, such as the TCHC buildings and duplexes, that some of them are affordable, and we have them scattered as rental units across the neighborhood. The community space layer actually takes up a large majority of this map. They are the purple dots on here, the pink purple. And these are actually mostly religious spaces. So while they provide services for different community members, they're only provided to their particular congregation. So it's important to keep that in mind when looking at this map, that a lot of people don't actually have access to these community services. Vaughan Road Academy was put on here to show that there are still so many hopes and dreams that have been brought up about Vaughan Road Academy and what it could be. So the next slide has community highlights continued in restaurants. So especially in the economic and cultural presentation, we heard that food was brought up a lot. And this was brought up across different working groups. And how do we connect between different communities, and how are people currently connecting between different communities? And restaurants is one of the main ways that we heard people connect. So we have, of course, a lot of Caribbean food places, but there's also Italian, Portuguese, East African, Filipino, Middle Eastern, and many more restaurants. While we do this well, a lot of places have lost business due to construction and COVID, and it's crucial that the community plan takes this into account. And also community members want more places that they can go and sit down in. So
Karen, there's a question of whether Oakwood
yes,
Library is a community space or a community center.
I'm going to answer all the questions at the end so that we're not keeping everyone too long after 9 o'clock. Sorry for the delay in answering though. So to move on, the community needs in the area were also highlighted among the different working groups. And consistently by different working groups we need increased affordable housing, increased green space in the northwest area of the neighborhood specifically, increased traffic safety, more community spaces and centers, and more health services. So while parks were mentioned, and I talked about them in the highlights section, a lot of people in our neighborhood don't actually have access to parks, and it can take 10 to 15 minutes just to get to the park entrance if you're in certain areas of our community. Community spaces and centers are also crucial. The libraries are hugely appreciated, but more is needed, and the services and recreational activities that community centers can provide are often requested in these groups. Vaughan Road Academy is a great site that might start having these needs. The darker brown points at the top around Eglinton and Dufferin show the current condo developments in the neighborhood, which are mainly up on in the northwest corner. These developments have the potential to make affordable housing issue even worse through increased luxury housing and condos, but they also have the potential of us, through advocacy, demanding affordable housing units to provide for our current community members that need them. So community needs were also continued along routes, so such as Eglinton, Oakwood, and Vaughan. People had a lot of different requests for these different places. So for example, on Oakwood, people want increased or regularized bus service, a bike lane, and increased green space such as trees lining the street. Eglinton was also a really big spot where, of course, because of the construction, there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen to maintain the current businesses and help increase safety around construction in that area for pedestrians and bikers alike.
And that's your 7 minutes.
That's my 7 minutes. Awesome. We have one more slide. So the next slide is more overarching community needs. So there were some overarching needs that don't focus on a particular point or route, but are crucial to our OV community plan. And these were services, revitalization, and affordability. Services include after-school programs, health, recreational, employment, and many more. There's a general lack of services. I noticed specifically that we don't really have any pediatricians in OB, which is pretty big missing area. The next is revitalization, which is key, especially along Eglinton, which has been hard hit by construction. This includes support of local businesses and increasing green space. It's also important to note that revitalization can go hand in hand with gentrification, and that we have to make sure that our revitalization efforts are not only aiming to make it a desirable neighborhood for people to move into, but actually supporting our community residents and the people who have suffered from 10 years of construction and like 2 years of the pandemic. Are we at that point now? So, which actually brings us to the third point, affordability. So housing prices have been increasing in the neighborhood and properties are being bought up to make luxury housing. The community needs actual housing that we can all afford. And also businesses need storefront rentals that they can afford so that we're not doing chain restaurants if we want to keep the restaurants that we all love. So these things are all crucial if we want OV that we know and love to remain, and also want people who, if we want increased services and support, especially for those who need it. So yeah, we're going to move on to questions, and I'm going to look at some of the questions we have
Thanks,
in the
Karen.
chat. And start
And while you're
answering.
taking a quick look, I'll just say to folks, thank you for hanging with us. We're about 2 minutes over our scheduled end time. Following some of these questions, Peter and I have a couple of concluding remarks, including, how do we help engage more people? We want to make sure that really this is truly an OV community plan. So we'll be looking for your ideas on that. I'm hoping, Karen, that's given you a moment or two to look at some questions.
So we have a question about whether libraries would be included in community spaces or community centers, and that would be included under community spaces. So community center was more very specific towards what we would define as a community center. So I think the only one we have in the neighborhood is Fairview. Is that the correct?
Fairbanks?
Fairbanks.
Community Center over on Dufferin.
Over on Dufferin, yeah. And then we also had a question about examples of services that are provided at church locations to congregation members. These were specifically important for seniors, especially who had some services provided, such as different activities.
Some of the churches do some senior program or senior women type of programs. Several of them were able to tell us that when we probed around trying to get into different parts of the senior community. And we didn't get responses from some, so we got to go knock on doors.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are some of the services provided. And also just a general community gathering space, which is really important for folks, is often provided by churches.
Great, maybe one more question. There are any? No.
Sorry, that was particularly speedy. I was supposed to originally have 15 minutes, I think, and then
things got compressed.
Yeah. So yeah, Bill points out that churches also have food banks and senior supports.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, we're going to be gentle with ourselves. We're volunteers here, and we're making it happen. Different polls aside. Okay, so we have a couple of concluding remarks. Karen, just going to ask that you open up our poll from slide 20, which is about, I think I just mentioned to everybody else, how can we start engaging? How can we get more people involved so that we've really got a true OV community plan? So Karen, if you could put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. There you go, Peter.
Yeah, well, this has been a work in progress. This research started way back at the beginning of the year in terms of statistical research, then community involvement around planning the big event, the kickoff event, organization of working groups after that, some larger, some smaller, a lot of work trying to gather information in the community, but we still need volunteers to, again, come into some of these working groups and work with us and maybe take the information from some of the working groups and starting to thinking about what you think should be in a community plan. You can connect to us through that email, ovcommunityplan@gmail.com. If you're interested in volunteering, we'd really like to hear from you. Whatever your interest is, we can find you a spot in our overall number of groups here. Volunteering involves about 2 hours a week, probably going through the end of January into February with working groups. You can help us with reviewing data and summarizing it, or writing if you have writing skills. helping us to organize some of the material that we need to use in writing an OV community plan, which we want to take back to the community. We're not going to produce a plan on our own. We're going to produce something that comes back to the community, and that will be a third community engagement strategy meeting, maybe end of January, early February. So those are some of the things we're looking to. So if you got excited about what you saw tonight and maybe what you'll see again Sunday afternoon, if you join us again, you might decide to join us.
Hopefully. And with that, we would like to say thank you. And there's many thank yous here. So thank you for joining us in this session. And perhaps we'll see you, as Peter said, also on the 12th. There will be some new information from working groups that you didn't hear from tonight. Want to say thank you to all the volunteers that we have had participating in the 7 working groups. They have done all of this through weekends and evenings and various times trying to make it all work. Thank you to all of you that we had 65 plus people that came out to our launch on the 27th of September to get this all started. That was the first meeting. This is the second. And as Peter mentioned, there'll be a third towards the end of January or perhaps February. To the working group co-leads, who many of whom signed up to do this without knowing really what is it going to be. It's one thing to read about something on paper and it's another thing to really do it. So thank you. And then to our planning group. That planning group has existed since April, and they have worked tirelessly to map out everything that you have seen tonight and that happened with our launch. So I really want to call out members of the planning group, and if you're still on the call here, please do raise your Zoom hand so everybody can see you. Peter, of course, Davin, Morgan, Zach. We've got Karina, Rebecca, Oscar, Natalie, and Kieran, of course, who joined us in late October. Thank you, Kieran, because you've been the magic behind all this happening tonight. And we wanted to also take a moment just to remember Michelle Sinea. So Michelle unfortunately passed away in June, and she had been one of our founding members of this group, and she actually helped us set up the structure for what you are seeing here. So we do remember Michelle. Thanks so much, everyone, and appreciate you joining us. Have a great evening. Take care. Okay, I think we can stop our recording. Thanks so much, Kieran. And we'll be holding on to everything that's in the chat.